If you're going to go it alone, diligence is really important, because I think spending time every week understanding how you're spending your money and what money is going to be coming out in the future, it's critical.
I'm Alex Symos, Vice President of our Go-to-Market Center of Excellence here at Edison Partners. We invest in growth stage companies with revenues between $10 million and $30 million in fintech, healthcare IT, and enterprise software. We offer the unique combination of growth capital and our Edison Edge platform, which is comprised of our operating centers of excellence, spanning sales and marketing, finance, product and tech, and leadership. Our Edison Director Network, made up of more than 150 active members with deep expertise running growth stage companies, and our ongoing executive education, customized to the needs of CEOs and their growing businesses and leadership teams. So many companies that we talk with lack financial controls, and this can cause a wrinkle in the fundraising process, and as importantly, threaten the efficiency of your business. Things like acquiring too much debt, not calculating your cash burn, or miscalculating it, hiring too quickly, and not making the right hires. There's a standard list of financial practices that all entrepreneurs should institute, regardless of your stage company, and we'll get to all of them right here.
Thank you, Alex, so much, and Edison Partners for helping us create this Entrepreneurs Toolkit series. We're so excited about today's guest. We're exploring common mistakes entrepreneurs make when it comes to accounting and finance. I'm here with our special guest, Chris DeMayo. He's a partner of the Technology and Emerging Growth Services practices at Withum. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
For those who are not familiar with Withum, can you tell us quickly what Withum's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Withum is the top 25 accounting firm in the country. On the East Coast, major hubs are Boston, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, DC, and Florida. On the West Coast, we're in San Francisco and LA. Second largest practice in the firm is our Technology and Emerging Growth Services group. And principally, it's venture-backed companies, high-growth companies, doing new and interesting things in a lot of different verticals: ad tech, fintech, crypto, e-commerce, all the usual suspects. And that practice is probably a top 10 practice in the country. So we're pretty myopically focused on this space.
Awesome. So obviously, you have a lot of expertise then when it comes to what entrepreneurs get right, and maybe more importantly, what they get wrong. So let's get right into some of these topics. Absolutely. We've got a whole host of things as things unfold. Let's start with, when should an entrepreneur hire a bookkeeper or an accounting firm?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you're really, really early and you haven't raised any money, you're always doing kind of the calculation of the value of your time versus the value of your money. Obviously, at that point in time, the value of money is really, really high, and you got time. So you're going to do your own books and records. You're going to manage it yourself. Generally, I say as a best practice is, after you've kind of raised that first formal round, I call it kind of a seed round or maybe a pre-seed. Maybe it's $500,000 to $1 million, where you actually have a little bit of capital. Now the value of your time is going up because you have to execute, and the value of that money is a little bit lower because you've got a little bit more of it. And at that point in time, I think is a really good time to get a bookkeeper to really start to kind of formalize the process of managing your books and records, and then being able to manage things like burn and report to new stakeholders in the company.
So what about the services? Let's get into some details. I've used QuickBooks, I use Wave, I've used offshore bookkeepers, I've used onshore bookkeepers. I still today get targeted on a variety of social media for lots of bookkeeping services that appear to be offshore. What have you had any experience with any of those? And as far as software goes, what do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, look, QuickBooks Online is a fantastic software. Xero is another one that's very, very common in the early stage space. And a lot of these Xero and QuickBooks Online, I generally see them the most often, and you can live in those softwares pretty long. We've got clients who've raised several rounds of large financing rounds, and they're still in QuickBooks and Xero. The companies that wind up having to grow out of those types of ERP systems are typically e-commerce companies that have really high volume, low transaction value. They got to manage inventory, and that's where QuickBooks starts to break a little bit. But generally, I would say best practice is to use QuickBooks. It's really cheap. It's pretty user-friendly and easy. The other option is, as we talked about, is there's a lot of different outsourced accounting options out there. So outsourced accounting is, hey, instead of doing the bookkeeping yourself, you're actually outsourcing to a third party, and that third party is going to handle the bookkeeping. They may handle your AP, Bill.com. They're going to implement their own QuickBooks software. That generally is another service that's out there, and it's a really good option for our startups because it's generally pretty cost effective, and they put together really, really good sets of books and records for you that then you can hand off to your third party accountant like me to do your tax returns and to advise you. Again, probably around that seed stage is a good time to do that. There's kind of a broad spectrum of outsourced accounting firms. Some are more expensive than others. In the seed stage, maybe pre-A, I would go with the less expensive options because, quite frankly, you're not going to have the complexity that's going to warrant the extra cost.
And have you been comfortable with what you've seen coming out of those outsourced options, whether they are onshore or off? Or do you have any red flags that raise about people, stay away from certain, if you see this, don't move forward?
Generally, I've been pretty comfortable. Over the last 10 years, I would say the outsourced accounting options have become much more robust than they were. And there's a lot more options in the marketplace. And when there's more options in competition, you're generally getting better quality. So generally, I've been pretty happy with what I've seen coming out of these third-party accounting firms.
And then I believe Withum also offers an outsourced accounting option. Isn't that right?
We do. We have outsourced accounting as one of our options. One of our many services that we offer in the firm. We call it our Oasis product, and it's a great option for our clients. What we will do is we sometimes can't offer it if we were doing audited financial statements for our clients, but certainly it's an option that we offer to all of our startups, and we have many that are actually on our platform.
Okay, great. So let's talk about, when someone's raising capital, often they need to get a 409A valuation. Can you first, for those who aren't aware, let them know what that is and have any advice on how to, in that process?
Yeah, so in the early stages of every high growth company, equity is a form of currency. When you're bringing on early stage employees, founders, really, really key C-level folks, you're going to be giving equity to a wide variety of people in the company and all different types of levels of equity. Sometimes it's as high as a point. Sometimes it's a lot less than a point, depending on who that person is a dev person, is a CFO. So whenever you're giving stock options to an employee, you have to, at the time that you give them that option, value that option. And they, at that point in time, get what's referred to as a strike price. So if they want to exercise their right to own those shares, they have to pay for it based on the strike price, which is the fair market value as of the date that they receive the option of the shares. In order to do that, you have to get what's referred to as a 409A valuation. And the reason why it's called a 409A is because it's actually Internal Revenue Code 409A that dictates the rules around valuation and deferred compensation plans. Generally, you have to get a 409A every year. If you get very technical here, one would say that you don't have to, but it's referred to as a safe harbor to the IRS, which means that if you get a third party to do a valuation of your company, the IRS won't challenge what that valuation is. If you don't get a valuation done, the IRS has the ability to challenge whether or not your strike price that you're giving to employees is correct. Very, very dicey play here if you don't get valuations done, because in diligence, when you're raising money in the future, that could create a problem. And it also could create a tax event for the people receiving stock options if you don't have an underlying valuation done every year. These things aren't expensive. Very much like outsourced accounting, there's a whole kind of industry that's now kind of built up around the startup space where you can get fairly cheap valuations done every single year to be able to support your deferred compensation plan, your stock option plan. It is a big mistake that some of our early stage companies make by not having this thing done. This is really, really good hygiene. Your investors expect it. They want these types of things buttoned up because it can cause problems in the future.
So what if someone has already raised a round, hasn't done this? How do they fix it?
Well, you can always go back and have them done retroactively. So you can say, hey, we raised around in February, it's April, what was our fair value at that time? You can go back and have a valuation done, just making sure that when you're issuing stock options, you have a good valuation. When you have a valuation done, it's generally good for a year. So you can have that valuation done as of February, and then you have a year to be able to use that valuation to issue stock options in the future. So if you haven't done it immediately around a fundraise, it's not a huge deal, but you just have to make sure you have it done. You don't have major gaps in from one valuation to the other.
There are alternative sources of capital like grants and loans. Any advice as it comes to how to account for some of those sources of funding where you've seen entrepreneurs fall short?
Yeah, I think one of the big issues that entrepreneurs fall short on is they're so hyper focused on building their business that these things kind of fall to the wayside. If you have a good advisor, if you have a good firm that you're working with, they should be very, very familiar with all the different options that are out there. Some of the classic stuff that's out there is now the refundable R&D credit. That's a big deal if you're a startup, because now to the extent that you engage in research and development, which is generally your dev team, you're going to get refunded money from the IRS through payroll credits. We often see, it's actually kind of disturbing, it's not uncommon for us to see startups missing out on this credit. They just don't know it exists because they may be working with companies that just aren't in this space. That's one example. But if you're in the state of New Jersey, there's a whole slew of different options that are out there in terms of getting capital from the state, whether it's selling your NOLs or maybe getting the angel credit. So making sure you're working with folks that understand kind of the local grants that are out there and local credits is really important, because if you're a founder, you shouldn't be doing a lot of brain damage on this. This is a tactical use of time, not strategic. This is why you hire advisors to be able to kind of use these things to clear your plate, make sure they're handling it, and then you're actually focusing on the ball.
So to just clarify one point there, NOL being net operating loss through a program administered by the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, NJEDA, which is a great resource to find some of these programs. For those who aren't local, where is it typically the Economic Development Authority type organization in the state where an entrepreneur can research some of these, or is it overwhelming and they really just need to reach out to a Withum type organization to help get navigate these things?
I generally say you want to reach out to an organization to do it. It can be overwhelming because every state is completely unique, and even where these credits are sort of housed and owned in the states can be different. So if you're in New York, as an example, there's the Excelsior credit, which is a very, very rich credit for high growth companies. New Jersey has NJ Grow. These are all different credits, different departments. So I think working with knowledgeable folks is going to be really important. If you're a company that's going to be expanding even outside the tri-state, it's a really important thing to understand where you're going, because there could be really rich credits there as well. Our crypto clients are finding that in the Midwest, there's some incredible incentives to build out their mining warehouses there, as an example.
Awesome. On managing cash flow and burn, especially early stage entrepreneurs who tend to be under-resourced, any advice on the best way to keep a handle on some of those key metrics?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's about being diligent, right? In the very early days, as we discussed, you have two options. You're going to use a bookkeeper, or you're going to try to go this alone. A bookkeeper is going to be able to manage your burn for you, and they should be able to report for you weekly or monthly, depending on what cadence you want, what that burn looks like. And any decent startup bookkeeper is going to kind of have a good sense of the reporting cadence that you need and what it should look like. If you're going to go it alone, diligence is really important, because I think spending time every week understanding how you're spending your money and what money is going to be coming out in the future, it's critical, because what we see often is founders don't have their eye close enough on finance, and then they find themselves in a cash crunch, and then they're going to investors in a cash crunch, and that creates some real tension around things like valuation, right? Because you're effectively, you're not asking for an umbrella when it's sunny. You're asking for an umbrella when it's already pouring rain, and that's generally when you get taken advantage of.
That's a great analogy. So obviously, in building this series with Edison, they do a significant diligence, as all investors do before investing. What issues have you seen come up, especially in early stage companies, when maybe it's their first real professional fundraise? What comes up where Withum has to either fix the problem, or maybe you're doing the diligence on behalf of the client, but what are some common issues and mistakes that you'd recommend entrepreneurs make sure that they avoid, especially when it comes to the diligence process?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest issues that we see come up in the earliest stages is company structure. So oftentimes pre-first round, our clients will choose an LLC structure versus a C corporation. Generally in the VC world, they always want a Delaware C corp when they get that kind of first formal round. So, but when we're an early stage pre-financing company, oftentimes they choose an LLC route for company type because it allows for some personal tax deductions that they wouldn't otherwise have. You can convert from an LLC to a C corp. We often see that there are complexities in that conversion that founders may not be aware of or understand. There are times when that conversion from an LLC to a C corp in order to raise the round can actually create a tax event for the founders, which is a nightmare because they don't have cash to pay the tax. So I think entity selection is really important early on, and that's really talking to your attorneys that understand the startup world. If I'm starting a company as a founder and going into it, I am 100% certain that I'm going to go out and try to raise VC capital. I don't love LLC structures because I think it creates some unintended consequences that founders may not love. The other problem with an LLC, we talk a lot about qualified small business stock, which is a really important concept for all founders and early stage employees to know about. The 30,000 foot level is if you have a C Corp stock and you hold it for 5 years as a startup, when you sell that stock, the first $10 million is 100% tax free, right? Huge deal. That clock, that 5-year clock doesn't start when you're an LLC. It starts when you are a C corporation. So that's another issue that kind of has come out of these early stage companies that live for a few years as an LLC and then convert to a C corp. These pieces aren't considered, and they can create real problems that are that are hard to unwind.
You bring up a variety of issues that have legal implications. How do you work, or how do you collaborate with the lawyer or the law firm on some of these issues? And have you found that you ever butt heads in some of these topics?
Well, it's a great question. I think having good communication between all of your service providers is important. Because you can butt heads because we all kind of have different priorities when we're helping our clients, get through a fundraise or get to the next stage of their life cycle. Sometimes decisions are made on the legal side to help them from a legal perspective that may not be helping them on the tax side. So having those conversations are really important, and being able to kind of introduce all of your service providers to each other is important. It's a small community. A lot of us already know each other. So, you're well served by making sure that we actually know that we're working together, because there's oftentimes I'll be working with a client and not even realize that an attorney that I've known forever is actually on the legal side until the fundraise is happening.
Yeah. What about when someone says, "Oh, my uncle's an accountant, my brother's a lawyer"? These services, as you brought up before, the relative cost early is a lot in dollars. Can they try those? Can they leverage friends and family for these services, or do you think that's it? Have you seen that be a tremendous mistake?
I think pre-fundraising, yes. Before you raise money, quite candidly, you're just building a concept, right? It's proof of concept. You're trying to get, a basic working foundation. It's okay to go with the absolute cheapest provider you can find, and sometimes it's Uncle Jimmy, right? I think once you raise money, at that point in time, you will have created complexity that you need to work with a real professional on. And going back to things like credits, right? It's penny wise, pound foolish. You may save a couple of bucks on a tax return, but you may lose thousands of dollars on a credit that Uncle Jimmy didn't know about, right? So I think that first fundraise is definitely the time when it's time to level up. And I definitely think prior to that, though, be a scrappy founder. Like, reserve your cash. Do everything you can to keep money from going out the door. Once you got a decent deposit from investors, then you are a steward of their money, and that's when you have to have decent financial advisors and legal advisors around you.
And what about keeping track of equity and the cap table and the various means of distributing equity and the tax implications that they make? Like you brought before, some of these early financially cheap decisions up front can have huge implications, on an exit. So what do you recommend people do when they think about granting equity, tracking equity, and all that?
Yeah, the biggest mistakes I see is early on founders getting too aggressive using equity as currency. and giving a lot of equity away to early stage employees or people who are consultants or people who are advisors. And it can become extremely expensive for you if the company actually gets traction. So having discipline around how you're giving equity away and how much is important, and you're going to need to use advisors to do that because you're not always going to have a good sense of what that is. I think the other piece is a huge mistake that I see is people not papering agreements. I can tell you I've had scenarios where on a handshake deal or there's an email somewhere that, person A said, hey, I'm going to give you 5% of the company to person B early on. They never papered it. They never really talked about what that 5% meant. And person B thinks 5% means 5% forever and ever and ever. Person A thinks it means 5% until we're diluted by other capital. And then a lawsuit happens when there's a sale, right? And I have seen that happen multiple times. So, and it can really grind fundraisers down to a halt if we have people that are popping up out of nowhere saying, well, wait a second, I got warrants, or I've got this, equity agreement that was really just a handshake deal. It could cause major problems. So papering every agreement that you have is really important. And now there's a million options out there. Card is a perfect example. Relatively cheap software that will allow you to manage your entire cap table online. It will automate things like agreements and automate signing agreements. To me, it's money well spent once you've raised your first round.
Awesome. Well, this is about all the time we have to review this. It sounds like, if I'm hearing you right, diligence, no matter the tool. It's okay to be scrappy, but you got to be smart and be very aware of those issues up front and planning for the long term early on. These things have massive implications. And maybe I'd add working with smart professionals as much as I've been the scrappy entrepreneur who's worked, onshore, offshore, and kind of everywhere in between. And I genuinely appreciate that we happen to work with Withum. This isn't a Withum commercial, but we've been happy with your services. There's lots of great providers out there, but getting good advice really can pay off. So I really appreciate you joining us, Chris. Any closing remarks before we go?
Yeah, I think every founder has to find that balance between being scrappy and entrepreneurial, and then knowing when it's time to actually press the button in terms of buttoning things up and being a good steward of the money that they're raising. And to me, that's some of the secret sauce in being a good CEO, entrepreneur, and builder.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris, for joining us and Withum for your partnership. And thanks, everybody, for watching. Make sure you check out our other episodes of the Entrepreneur's Toolkit with Edison Partners. We share industry secrets on PR and branding for startups. We also go into great startup legal insights that complement a lot of what you heard today. So make sure you check those out. Chris, thanks a lot.